Welcome back to Monday Madness Part 2. In this part of the video, we will make some new bread. I started making bread with this cookbook. I did use other recipes, probably used one that my mom had, but one of my kids won this at the county fair, and I've just loved this book, and as you can see, it is well worn, well used, falling apart. But that is a sign of a successful cookbook and something that you use a lot. So it starts with the yeast dough basics. And here's a traditional white bread recipe. And the recipe calls for 6 to 7 cups of all-purpose flour, 3 tablespoons of sugar, 1 tablespoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of shortening, 2 packages of active dry yeast, and 2 1/4 cups of very warm water. Now, this makes, what does this make right here? 2 loaf pans full. I take this basic recipe and I have added things to it through the years. And I usually at least double it, if not triple it. So when I get going really fast and I start working, I just throw things in because I've done it so much. What I've ended up doing is I probably use about 14 cups of flour, 6 tablespoons of sugar, 2 tablespoons of salt, and 2 tablespoons of shortening, or sometimes I just throw a stick of butter in when I'm tripling it. And then the water will have to be at least probably 7 cups. So you can just, the thing about yeast dough is it's very forgiving. You can maybe have a little less water in relation to the yeast, to the flour, what have you, and you can still get it to rise and be a really nice dough. I also put 2 eggs in my dough. Why do I do that, you ask? I don't know. I don't remember. I just started doing it, and now I continue to do it, and I think it makes it even fluffier. I will put this recipe book up here while I make my bread, but I'm just going to show you what I do, and I just get going really fast because I know what I'm doing, and I've done it and done it and done it. I wanted to show you the flour that I use whenever I can. It's from Wheat, Montana, and it has done a really, really good job for me. You can use any all-purpose flour you want. I try to make sure that I get unbleached. You know, why do you want to use that extra step of them bleaching the flour white? It's not good for you. Even as it is, this is very processed, so we'll just take it for what it is. And I also make sure that I sift my flour because it makes the bread even lighter and fluffier. The first thing we're going to do is get our yeast going. This recipe calls for 2 1/4 cups of very warm water. But what I'm going to do is fill this whole thing with water. And the recipe calls for 2 packages of yeast. Each package of yeast has about 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, and so it's not a complete tablespoon. I use 2 tablespoons of yeast for making my great big amount. So when I double and triple it, I would probably end up using probably about 3 to 4 tablespoons of yeast. You want your water to be very warm but not hot. I kind of just eyeball the yeast. I think I'm just going to use about 3 tablespoons today. So you put that in the water, and you need to use some sugar to activate it. I'll use about, half a tablespoon. And then you just stir it, stir it, stir it. And you're letting it rise while you get your other ingredients ready. Since we have a full cup of water here, we're only going to need about 3 1/2 cups of water. Okay, the warm water is in. I'm going to add the 6 tablespoons of sugar. And I'm going to add the 4 tablespoons of shortening. But in this case, I'm going to use butter. And 4 tablespoons of shortening is about half a stick of butter or a 1/4 cup of butter. Then I'm going to add the 2 eggs. Then it'll be time to add the salt. 2 tablespoons of salt. Now remember that I am doubling this recipe right here. I think you should go back over your recipe and make sure you're getting everything in that you should and cleaning up while you're going. We have the flour and the yeast and water left to put in. Do you see how the yeast is rising right here? You really want to watch it. Sometimes you can set it in a bowl if you're busy doing something else and you don't want it to spill on your counter. But I make sure that it gets a full chance to raise all the way up to the top of the glass. Time to add the dough hook. Okay, so now the yeast is starting to go over, as you can see, so I'm going to get it in the bowl before we make a huge mess. And I have sifted the flour. I have sifted about 6 cups so far. Now this is where it gets noisy and a little bit messy, but I have 6 cups of flour that has been sifted. You're supposed to add it gradually, but there's so much water in here since I'm doubling it. I am just going to put most of it in right now. Then I'll get it mixed up and I'll see how much more flour that it needs. Time to put the bowl up and turn it on low. And while it's mixing, I'm going to go sift 6 more cups of flour. Time to add more flour. Let that mix up really well. We'll add some more. You get an idea of how much your dough will need just by looking at it. If you want to become proficient at anything, you just have to practice, practice, practice. We all make mistakes. We all start off and do a terrible job, but just don't give up. Do you see how it's thickening? I add a little less and slower right now. Okay, since I've doubled the recipe, I have added 12 cups of flour so far. The recipe calls for 6 to 7 cups, so you just kind of have to watch it. Clean up the area as you go. I do not like my dough sticky. Do you see this? We're starting to get a good dough. But I do not like my dough sticky, so I'm going to add at least another cup. Other people may not do that, but I cannot stand working with dough that's too sticky. You see how it's working its way up the hook? That's another indication for me that it's starting to get thick enough. Now let's check it again. I think that looks pretty good. We've ended up using 12.5 cups of flour after we doubled this recipe. So then I just get some coconut oil or butter on my fingers so they don't get all sticky, and I take the dough off the hook. I'm going to do a little bit of kneading. Pull it away from the side. There you go. We're going to let it rise till double in bulk. Time to punch the dough down. See how light and fluffy that is? Beautiful. I'm going to let it raise just a little bit more, then I'm going to put it in the pans. Get it covered back up, and we'll wait a little longer. It's time to put the dough in the pan, but first we have to grease the pans, and I'm going to use my butter papers that I save. I'm going to put a little coconut oil on the top so I can work with the dough. And I think we can make at least 3 loaves out of this amount. I like to make the loaves fairly big. So let's cut it in half. Maybe we'll get 4 loaves. Cut it in half again. Take out a piece. And then we'll start to work with it. I kind of turn my loaves like that until I get a pretty little shape on them. Now it's time to brush them with melted butter or coconut oil. That helps them brown a lot better. Now it's time to cover them with a tea towel and let them rise. With the dough that's left, there's not a ton of it. I could either make rolls to go with the soup that I'm making, or I could make cherry rolls. I really like cherry rolls, and they're really easy. All you have to do is roll out this dough, brush it with butter, put a little sugar, put down some cherry pie filling, roll it up and cut it like you would your cinnamon rolls, and then you have delicious cherry rolls. Just grease a 9x13 rectangle. Brush the dough with butter. Looks like it's time to put the bread into bake. I have 2 of the loaves of bread out of the oven, and now I'm brushing them with butter. It smells so wonderful in here between the soup and the bread baking and the cherry rolls baking. I really wish I had smell-o-vision for you. So I ended up with some delicious cherry rolls for dessert. They are so good. Some soup and 3 loaves of bread. I hope you enjoyed this video and all the things that I made today. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.